relate to the workplace? We're going to have to find out. With Phil's good technology, here we go, we're doing it. I've just given you here the general principles and the individual functions as a whole in holism, motivation is future-oriented, and the need to belong is fundamental, and humans are fundamentally social. So whatever else you think about humans, understanding their social nature is probably the most important thing to understand. How does it affect us in the workplace? The workplace, of course, is a social organization. Even if you're working on your own in Alaska or North Pole or South Pole, at some point the work you're doing gets communicated with others. And so whenever we're working, it's within a social context. We need to understand that the workplace has all the characteristics of other social groups. It has to be understood in the same way that Adlerians help us to understand social behavior at all levels. Understanding the unique characteristics of each work group or organization helps illustrate the characteristic of holism that Adler was talking about. When he was talking about working with a client or a patient, you have to understand the unique characteristic of that individual. Adler's position about this was straightforward. You can't categorize people and have it be useful in understanding the individual, because each of us is unique. Now, there are people who advocate categories because it helps to think of what kinds of predictions you can make about the person. So if you put a label on an individual, you may be able to make predictions because other people with the same label have certain ways in which they behave. But from Adler's point of view, that was pretty foolish, because you're losing the unique characteristics of each individual. And so along with holism was the emphasis on the unique individual. And we need to understand that about the workplace as well. Each place that we go to work has unique qualities, unique characteristics. And when we speak about a family, we're talking about a unique family. Each family is unique. If you change the members in the family, the unique characteristic of that family also changes. And that happens in the workplace. When we get new people into the workplace, the unique character we had before changes. And when some of the people that were in the workplace leave, the unique character again changes. So these unique characteristics are not fixed, but nevertheless we need to understand them if we want to understand what is going on with the individual, if we're doing individual counseling, and we need to understand it for the individual workplace if we're working within one organization. If you're consulting with someone in a workplace, you need to be able to recognize what are the unique features of that workplace. There are a few things you can look for. One of them is, what kind of an organization is it? Is it egalitarian or hierarchical? Now, I'm not going to be able to give you all of Adlerian psychology in just an hour, but when you read it and when you study it and you work with it, you realize that the principle of social equality is a very important one for Adlerians, and it was part of Adler's last stage of writing. It was what Dreikers picked up as a key, and partly what makes Adlerian psychology so extremely useful is that Adler identified the need for equality, So an egalitarian system turns out to be one that maximizes Adlerian principles. Adlerians do have many principles, not just the three key ones. And encouragement is one principle, but having equality between individuals and between groups is another. We need to look at that for a minute, and we need to look at the fact that it is when we have equality of value, of dignity, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about equality of value and equality of dignity and equality of respect. That when we have that, the maximum potential of every human being becomes actualized. You're more likely to function at your optimum in an environment in which all members of the group, all members of the family, the school, the workplace, treat each other with equality and dignity, respect, and value. It's such a complex concept, the egalitarian one, that Dreikers wrote a whole book about it. It's called Social Equality. Frank, I don't think you have it here in this conference, but I urge people to buy it on Amazon or from the Adler School or wherever, because it highlights what Dreikers was most proud of. It was published just before his death in '72, and he was thrilled. He was already very, very ill, and he was thrilled that the book was there, because it represented what was for him his true sense, his true meaning of Adlerian psychology. And Achi Yotam, who some of you know or you've heard about Achi, who was one of the leaders of the international summer school called ICASI, said it was the greatest contribution that Adler and Dreikers made. So you need to read that, you need to think about it to understand what it was that Adler and Dreikers meant about equality in that sense. But the principle of democratic human relationships captures it. And if you read the books that Adler and Dreikers and many others wrote about family life, school life, you know that egalitarian relationships in terms of mutual respect, equality of value, and dignity are key. So the question is, what kind of an organization do you work in? What kind of an organization are you a manager in? If it's egalitarian, the human relationships are going to be very different than if it's hierarchical. And the question of how hierarchical matters. In some organizations, or under some administrators in an organization, the hierarchy is extreme. You're not allowed to talk to anyone above your rank, for example. Now, does that mean that organizations that are enormous, like a university or a large corporation, don't have stratification? Of course not. They have to. They have to have stratification. But hierarchical systems which impact human relations in an unreasonable way can be extremely difficult and discouraging for the members. And having methods of communication across all levels easily in a rule-based way, but not based on strict separation of status groups. This is critical. And so that's one way you can identify the nature of an organization. How much is their communication across status groups in a rule-based, orderly fashion? And how much is it not allowed? Now notice I've used the word rule-based and orderly, and I'm going to introduce that at the moment because it's part of the concept of democratic processes. I'm going to digress just long enough that you can see that democratic processes emphasize and maximize egalitarian mutual respect in the following way. The members treat each other certainly with respect, one equal to another. They don't put each other down, they don't demean each other, and they solve problems together. But the characteristic that Dreikers described about democratic systems is important here, and that is, in a democratic system, you have order and freedom both. It's crucial to have both. In the laissez-faire system, you have freedom and no order, and in the autocratic system, you have order and no freedom. And so, in a hierarchical system, you can have a lot of order, very little, if any, freedom, and it does not bring about the best optimum performance of the people in the workplace. So egalitarian and democratic in this sense go together. Hierarchical tends to go with an autocratic system. I'm only talking about people who are managerial, CEO kinds of people who are autocratic and very hierarchical in their thinking. High level of emotional significance for its members. This is how the workplace differs from the family. It's important to know this. There are things you do in the family that you don't do at work. In the family, the drawers can come down. I don't think they can at work. So you can figure out that the South Carolina Society is not a working organization. That's okay. Friendships, family. We're informal with each other. We have far fewer rules. We learn each other's peculiarities. We accept them. We might value them. If our spouses and our children really are so well behaved that all the pranks have disappeared, we just might throw up our hands in great disbelief and terrible feeling of anxiety. What's happening to my family? They used to make so much fun. The point is that you don't make fun in the workplace. It's serious business. You have to be productive. You're accountable. You're responsible and accountable. And the workplace has all kinds of rules of its own. So, as a task of life, it's not the same as the other tasks that Adler was talking about. So we have love, we have friendship, and we have work as the three tasks of life that Adler was talking about. And in the workplace, relationships have to be different than they do in love and friendship. The goals of the groups are different. Remember how important goals are? The goals of the family, the goals of friends, and the goals of the workplace are not the same. And since they have different goals, they're going to have different structures, they're going to have different relationships, they're going to have different dynamics. And we have to understand the goal of the workplace. So we have at one level a formal goal. The organization exists because there is a formal goal. It may change. The Board of Trustees may decide it's not going to have the same goal as it did, but there is still going to be a work-related goal. An emotional goal is not normally part of the workplace. Now, we might include emotional factors in some kinds of social service agencies and in some kinds of mental health work, but overall, the concept of what we're contributing in the workplace is not an emotional one. So we have on the one hand the formal goal of the workplace, and we have also the goals of the workers. These are the individuals within the organization, and they have goals. So now what I'm asking is, to what extent do they have emotional goals within the workplace? How high level of emotional significance do the members have in this workplace? Does the workplace provide friendship? Does it provide comfort? Does it provide a sense of value for the individual? It can have so much emotional significance for the individual that this could be in conflict with the goal of the work organization. And it has happened many times. So we need to look at the goals of the organization, the goals of the individuals, and to what extent do the individuals come to work because it has emotional value for the individuals, or it's simply a materialistic, production, intellectual-oriented endeavor. This makes a big difference. If the productivity of the organization depends on high level of intellect, high level of work output, minimum level of emotion, it can cause a great deal of conflict between the individual and the place that the person is working in. And these are the kinds of things that if you're working in an organization and helping individuals cope better, that they have a better match between their own personal goals and the goals of the organization. What kind of social climate does the organization have? Warmth and cold are certainly good descriptors of emotional climate, and social climates are somewhat touched by that. Organizations can be very cold. Nobody ever asks anybody, how are you? If your mother or father are ill, your children are ill, nobody cares. It's whether you do your work that counts. There's a kind of an emotional and a kind of a social climate that the workplace provides. Understanding what the workers' goals for a social climate are and what the organization's goals are is important. Meshing them, matching them helps. It's sometimes a much higher morale when there's a good match. Does it mean that all work goals for the organization must fit what the workers want? No. When you have a democratic system, all the goals of all the individuals and all invested members have to be coordinated. That's a key aspect of the democratic process. And so just because the workers want emotional satisfaction doesn't mean that becomes the key goal for the organization. On the other hand, the organization takes it into account and tries to find ways of having it fit organizational goals that are not related to social climate or emotional climate. Style of leadership. This is crucial. This is where democratic, autocratic, and laissez-faire really make a difference. An autocratic leader can be of many types. It's more than one style of leading without a question. I've done some research in these kinds of areas. Some of you have already heard about collectivism and individualism. May I find out how many of you know those terms? Oh gosh, that's great. A lot of you do. Just for those of you who don't, collectivism is a very useful way of talking about cultures, societies, but ethnic groups and so on, religious groups. Collectivism simply refers to the fact that the collective value transcends what individuals want or what individuals do. So the collective will is what is dominant. And the individualism value is one in which the individual's values, the individual's wills and desires are dominant. For those of you who've thought about this, I do want to have you understand that Adlerian psychology has the great advantage of being able to integrate both. Because with the concept of social interest, which is the fundamental desire and commitment of humans to contribute to the welfare of the community, that has strong collectivistic qualities. However, Adlerian psychology equally strongly talks about individual responsibility, that we each make choices, we each set our own goals. And one of the key aspects of Adlerian psychology is that in parenting, you train children to be responsible, to understand the consequences of their own behavior. The children learn to think about the effect of how their actions affect others. And so Adlerian psychology is strongly directed towards individual responsibility.